Hello, composers! So, a question I've seen online in various music communities at one point or another is regarding books on the concepts of music composition. Do I read next? I've already learned theory. Who can recommend a good book to me? The answer to that is a bit long-winded in that there's a lot of answers, but this video is hopefully an answer to those questions and more. Now, for the purposes of this video, we're actually going to assume that you already know the basics of music theory and want to dive more into the actual art of music composition. But let's get this out of the way real fast. You cannot truly learn the art of music composition from a textbook. You can learn a great deal about the craft by reading the selected text, however, and many would actually consider doing so to be the first step to a greater understanding of the craft. To that end, our first book is actually part two of a two-parter. Paul Hindemith, The Craft of Musical Composition. Book 2. And this book, published in 1939, again, it's part 2. This is, exercises in two-part writing. You might think, what are you thinking? I mean, it's part 2. Now, hang on, there's a reason. So, this book is a mainstay in the world of teaching composition. The second book discusses at great length the concepts and ideas of melodic and harmonic design. This is perhaps one of the greatest resources on the subject of melodic design available to composers, in my opinion, as it not only teaches you the do's and don'ts of designing a melody, but also demonstrates these concepts frequently in the examples given. In particular, when paired with part 1, this book is a must-read, especially for composers who are sometimes a bit more intellectually or mathematically driven. Now, that being said, you don't have to be mathematically driven in order to understand this book. These books are great in that it takes a very practical approach to teaching a very difficult subject, melodic and harmonic contours and lines. The approach is given, particularly compared with part 1 here, actually create a very distinguished look at the art and melodic harmonic contour. Like, it just, the viewpoints on it are fabulous. The book is seemingly narrow in focus, though, as it outright ignores things such as style, form, texture, etc., that we sometimes think of as basic compositional concepts. As such, I would likely use this book in tandem with another book that goes over the missing concepts, depending on what the student needs. I have at times assigned book 1 as a required reading or a summer reading before taking composition lessons because I feel it does a fantastic job at recontextualizing traditional music theory into the music of Paul Hindemith and many other 20th century composers. I actually consider these two books to be among the most important in our arsenal of texts on the subject matter. Now, that leads us to our next book, one that would frequently pair with it. The Leon Dalin Techniques of 20th Century Composition. It is a wonderful, comprehensive look at traditional music composition in the 20th century. The entire book can be structured quite easily as an introductory composition class, or even a semester-long seminar on the subject. The book begins, as expected, with the roots of composing a good melody, and introduces the reader to modes and discusses harmonic structures and progressions. Things such as cadences, tonality, and rhythm and meter are also covered in depth before the last portion of the book introduces some of the more advanced concepts available to you. It is at the end where we find things such as form, innovative techniques, imitation, and a very rudimentary look at 12-tone, at least compared to later texts. So again, these two in tandem, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. The Hindemith and the Dalin, with, of course, book 1 of the Hindemith coming as a prepared reading ahead of time. Now, the next book, the Reginald Smith Brindle serial composition. This is something that I often think of when it comes to second-year composition students in the undergraduate sense. Why is this? So this book by Reginald Smith Brindle is a great book for introducing the concepts of serial composition to any student, regardless of level. The first part of this book talks at length about the idea of pitch class series, how to build it, and how to derive new forms of it throughout a composition. The second part of the book goes over things such as melodic construction, the writing of music in several parts, and the basics of 12-tone harmony and polyphonic writing. The back half of the book discusses a great deal of topics, including writing for voice, basics of orchestration, style, and even improvisation, which I think is pretty cool to talk about. This half of the text also includes a section on form, which seems to express the idea that form as a method for composition is perhaps becoming an obsolete method in favor of free-form composition. That is, however, I think a relatively subjective thing, because I do think that there's still a good place in the repertoire for a good old binary form piece of music. Overall, this book does a great job of introducing serialism and showing how one might adjust different aspects of our writing to better fit it, which I think is absolutely marvelous. Now, this book excels in many ways when it comes to teaching the serial technique. It even does a commendable job at explaining the basis of melody, harmony, and form. The book does lose a great bit of steam after roughly chapter 8 or 9, though. This is partially due to the repetitive nature of the content presented in the back half. Overall, the back half seems to be roughly 3/4 of restatement of the first half. This is with exceptions, of course, particularly chapters 10 and 16. These chapters on form and free atonality or 12-tone thoroughly cover the future of these concepts in regards to our own compositions. In particular, the chapter on forms steers the reader toward a free-form composition way of thought. This is an intriguing and, in my opinion, welcome line of thought in today's compositional world. In general, it would be best to only rely on the early chapters 1 through 8, as that's really kind of the core of composition, with 10 and 16 being good addendums later on, at your own destruction. Not destruction, your own discretion. Wow, I am having one of those days. So after that, we get to a bit of a fork in the road. From here, it greatly depends on your own personal interests. So first, we have an old classic, Kennan, Counterpoint. So the reason why you've probably heard of this book, if you even thought of writing music, is it's a classic, and it's the latest in a long line of counterpoint books stretching back through the common practice era. There's a reason we keep coming back to it in the field of music composition. It works. Counterpoint is, for those that are not terribly familiar, it's the idea that if you have a voice that goes up, you need another voice that goes down. It also introduces, there's an entire chapter that I think is structured very well on constructing the melodic line. And in particular, it's very handy later on because you actually get into species counterpoint. And I actually feel like learning counterpoint is incredibly important. I would say it's important to do, in parallel with this entire set of composition books. I think it's incredibly important. But if you haven't already, I would consider this to be the next in your series of reads, or, perhaps in parallel. Now, counterpoint for many people gets a little bit repetitive, so I would recommend doing a course on it instead of just reading the book. But if you're already composing music and you want to learn more about counterpoint, you want to be able to write music, I'd say, a little bit faster, a little bit more accurately, without having to sit there and do spot checks with your ear consistently, this is a great book for that, because you learn the basics of how to just tell with your eyes on paper that's going to work. And particularly for those of you that are looking to be film, TV, video game, etc. composers, because you often in those cases have to rewrite something on the fly. There are several times where film composers have just under 3 or 4 minutes to rewrite and reorchestrate 3 bars of tune, and you have to make it connect from the bar before and the bar after. So have fun with that. But yeah, again, counterpoint. Wonderful, wonderful text. Now, the next area I want to talk about is kind of going down that serialism rabbit hole a little bit more. And for that, we have Charles Wuorinen, Simple Composition. This is a book from the late 70s, early 80s, and Simple Composition it's written by Charles Wuorinen, one of the contemporary experts in the concepts of 12-tone composition. And it takes 12-tone composition and goes as in-depth as possible on the subject matter. The book, while a very dense read, trust me, this is the most dense read of this entire list by far. Despite being dense, it is incredibly informative on a system of music that, to many people, is frequently considered to be outdated, though I personally disagree. I think 12-tone is a valuable tool, but Either way, the ideas in this book suggest that 12-tone music, as we were taught via the music of Schoenberg, Berg, and Wuorinen, is merely at the beginning of what is possible using this compositional device. The author even addresses how to derive form, rhythm, texture, etc. from the use of 12-tone techniques. So again, if you really want to go down that serialism rabbit hole, particularly with 12-tone, this is the way to go. This book is incredibly informative, highly engaging if you are interested in the subject matter, and has excellent use cases, particularly for a student I have that keeps finding themselves drawn to serial and 12-tone technique. This book does struggle as far as accessibility goes, however, since the book is written at a very high level and seems to demand a thorough knowledge of composition going into it, and I don't just mean of serial, like, you would need to have a fully functional understanding of all of the books listed so far and more in order to, like, really get the rest of this book, and that seems to be what a lot of other people think too. It's just, but it's a good book still, despite the fact that's very dense and written at a very high level. As a general composition text, this book seems to fall flat though, which is why it's a bit later in the video. But again, if I have a third year student, maybe fourth year, that's really into that, this is the book for them. This is absolutely the book for them. Now, an alternative to serialism, we have David Cope. Where's my Cope? Over here. Let me go grab my Cope. Look at me not knowing what books I've pulled off my shelf. So, the David Cope New Music Composition. It was another book from the late 70s. And this book is... it's a little odd to address, as it's so varied in its content. This text addresses concepts that are frequently omitted from entire composition programs, such as polytonality, microtones, biomusic, indeterminacy, prepared piano, and many chapters regarding to different aspects of electronic music and instrument creation, even. There are a few of the usual topics covered here, such as melodic direction and the basics of 12-tone even, but where this book really shines is on areas of music we don't often look further into, such as things such as the biomusic and prepared piano. And if you even just look at the table of contents here, it's insane. It actually goes over things such as microtones. Not many other composition texts go over the concept of microtones in depth. It actually goes into, I think, a fairly good discussion on electronic music, music concrete, etc. And this is a book that I love keeping as a reference, and I would recommend, once you, even if you're not interested in this type of music, it's a good eye-opener. It's a good thing to have on your shelf for if someone asks you, hey, what do you know about electronic music? You can learn a little bit from this. Hey, what do you know about biomusic? Learn a bit about it from here. And having read it a couple times, I will say, to me, it reads easy. The one thing that I will criticize is, now this is something that's a bit controversial, but I don't like all that white space that it's printed with. I know that a lot of books are printed like this to, like, give you area to, like, take notes and all that, but honestly, most of my notes are on stickies, and this isn't even my notated version. I've got that somewhere. I don't know where my other version of it is, but it's probably somewhere around here. So that is a cursory outlook on a lot of books that I personally think highly of, and things that I talk about whenever I'm with a student or with someone else that's looking to study music composition. Another book of note, however, that doesn't make it into kind of my big greatest hits list is the Schoenberg Fundamentals of Music Composition. This is, I sometimes will swap this in for the Dalin, and it really just depends on the kind of student. If I have a student that is a bit better on, like, the short, simple reads, needs something a little bit shorter, sweeter to the point, this might be the book for them. But if you want to go slightly more in depth, it might be the Dalin. So again, I think it really just depends which way you want to go. They're both great books. They teach you the same stuff, but again, just it really depends, like, how I feel about the student on which one I'll assign, the Dalin or the Schoenberg. So again, another lovely book there. So again, that's just the tip of the iceberg, though. There's a lot of other books. There's a lot of other composition books too. And was your favorite music composition book listed on this quick list? If not, what are some of your favorite composition books? What do you think of my list? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, this is Zach Daniels signing out. See ya!